you're likely not able to go into a bank and get financing for the startup costs.
Yep.
There are a set of lenders that are private individuals, typically, could potentially be private firms that are generally there. So I mentioned that venture capitalists often invest for equity. Private money lenders invest debt.
Hey everyone, my name is Ethan DeLeon, and I'm here with our founder and CEO of Small Nation, Jason Duff. Joining us today on the show, we have the founder of Zell Capital and Nikola Labs, Will Zell. We want to welcome you to the Small Nation podcast, where we share some of the valuable lessons with what we have learned about entrepreneurship, real estate, economic development, and more. The point of this podcast is to create value for you, the listener, and to create a space to learn, talk about what's trending, and inspire others. So, Jason, from my understanding, you and Will have known each other for a while now.
You know, Will and I have only been out of school for like just a few years, like
Just a few years.
maybe 20.
What year did you guys graduate?
So I was, I think I'm a year older than Will. I was 2000 in high school, and you 2001.
Yep.
You know, and growing up in small towns, we went to the competitive schools. So I went to Indian Lake, and Will went to Bell Fountain, which sometimes in sports rivalries and everything else, there's like, you know, a lot of jealousy and you know, challenges, but we hit it off because we were part of an organization called Key Club.
Key Club.
Key Club was the service club that was part of the Quantis family. And in all high schools, you had a chance to get involved in service projects. And Will happened to be the president of Bell Fountain, and I was the president of Indian Lake. So we had to do kind of co-club activities, which was great because our friends group got to mix and got to meet and understand that maybe had some shared goals. One of those was seeing positive changes in communities. And at the time, Will had some dreams and ambitions related to running for office, right?
Yeah, it was a super interesting time. Probably the first entrepreneurial decision I made, even though it wasn't directly related to business, but decided to run for city council in Bell Fountain my senior year of high school, which was quite interesting, and leaned on you for a lot of advice and input and inspiration. So thank you.
Well, I'm just saying, being young,
I lost. So I also blame you for that.
So first lesson of today is maybe don't listen to all of Jason's advice.
Can I tell you, like, what's great about being young is that there's this chance for you to make mistakes, but also the kind of the courage and passion and energy behind wanting to see change. And I think that's where Will and I connected, because we were frustrated. There were some things that just were not going the way it should in town. And we, you know, wanted to start businesses and live here, but we felt that there wasn't places for people like us to live. And there wasn't the kind of things that you would often see in a big city that didn't exist in a small town.
Yeah, it's one of the interesting. So a lot of people and a lot of the Small Nation story is told, let's say, over the last 12, 14 years or so.
Yeah.
I'm one of the few that actually has the fortune to really understanding Jason 20 years ago. And like, that's really where the seeds were planted and developed for what is happening today in downtown Bell Fountain and the impact across, other cities across the country. And, it really started then. So, you hear overnight success, but it's decades in the making. And, the Downtown Revitalization Committee, remember that? And the Edward Jones.
Will and I were volunteers. I mean, there were, at the time in our town, there was a group of people that came together and said, hey, we want to make downtown Bell Fountain better. And so we attended meetings where we served on the promotions committee. We served on being mentored by other leaders that gave us ideas, and we got to see about the importance of governance. So actually calling a meeting to order, having an agenda, having conversations where we may have different opinions around the table, but at the end we'd make a decision. And I think what Will and I kind of learned is that you needed that to get the ideas and the goals, but sometimes one thing that can happen in towns and communities, or even any company or organization, is you get stuck in committee speak and nothing gets out to be actionable and get done. And I think for both of us, even though the organization struggled and after, when the economic crisis hit in 2007, we lost our funding, like our public funding from the city and county went away. Many of us that were volunteers that were working as part of that revitalization committee started to go out and do. And you and your wife were really...
Many being you.
Well, actually, that's not true. You and your wife, and that's what I think. I think where we went out together is that we knew that we had to activate real estate, and we had to buy real estate in the town to plant a flag to say we want to do something. But tell us about you and your wife Beth and that first step for you.
Yeah, but first, by and large, you were the one that took up the mantle, rolled up the sleeves, and just started getting to work, right? And none of it. I hope everyone gets a chance to come to downtown Bell Fountain and see everything that's happened and hear the story. But it would not be anything near what it is without the work that you've done and started then. Sweeter Home. So I started investing in real estate actually back in like 2007, more kind of residential real estate, and did have one property downtown. And then started getting more active investing in real estate on the tail end of the financial crisis. There were a lot of buying opportunities, and acquired a couple more buildings in downtown Bell Fountain. But still, I mean, you were just early in the phase of starting to build momentum. There's still a lot of issues. But, it's one of those things. So my wife, Beth, incredible human being, incredible wife, and a great entrepreneur. So successful entrepreneur. And we had always talked about, her dream to have a coffee shop and bakery. And we had 3 kids at that time, 2, and I think she was pregnant with the 3rd. So it was always this kind of talk about let's do it, at some point in the future. But the opportunity, the real estate opportunity for the real estate opened up. That was just a great opportunity to buy a building that needed a lot of repair, needed a lot of work, but it just had the bones to be a great coffee shop. And I think that's what entrepreneurs do is like if, a door opens and it's there for a moment of time, you just have to take the risk and go. And that was back in 2011. That's when we bought the building, opened Sweet Aromas Coffee, Valentine's Day 2012, and just celebrated 10 years earlier.
Congratulations.
Yeah, it's been a great journey.
And I was just in there this past weekend, and I can personally attest that place is bumping.
Yeah, and I think it's reflective, actually, in some ways, of the energy and the culture that's developed more broadly. Because a lot of kind of the benefits of coffee shops is like a lot of it's built around community, right, and bringing people together. And if I think back the journey over the last several years, you can see more and more people coming in, more economic activity in downtown Bell Fountain, and just more of this kind of focused, passion and joy around community and being together. And I think that's just reflective of the broader cultural shift in our community, which is great.
Yeah. And I love that you're here today and able to speak to this, but I think, both of you, as we kind of already touched on, are just, activators and making things happen. And I think that there'll be a lot of people listening to this that, have big ambitions, big ideas. But a lot of people, I feel like, struggle with the how to get it done. So, I mean, you both kind of started in real estate a little bit, but what was next for you in that journey as an entrepreneur that eventually led you into the investing role?
Yeah, so I would say one of the most important things and kind of quote unquote easiest things that you can do if you have ambition and ideas that you want to pursue, especially in business, is to find mentors. And I so happen to be on a podcast with one of mine today, and quite frankly, and not only a mentor, but truth tellers.
I'm flattered, Will.
Ethan, man,
thank you, Ethan.
Our first conversation the other day inspired my life so much. But in all seriousness, like, Jason is a year older than me, but like just so incredibly advanced in terms of mindset and like ideas and execution on them. That especially in my early 20s of like when I was thinking about different ideas, different businesses. I mean, we had lots of conversations in your office, and he's always been a truth teller, right? And I think that's what great mentors do is they will see potential, right? And they will take kind of their experience and the good, the bad, the ugly, and impart that into someone where they see potential. So if you're on the other side of like, I've got ambition, go out and find somebody who is building the life or has built the life that you dream of in your mind, right? What is still a dream in your mind, go and connect with people in a very authentic way to learn, right? And to have conversations. And Jason, you've mentored probably hundreds of people, and there's always a give and take there. It's not just, when someone's coming to you asking for advice, it's not just you giving to them, you're actually receiving a lot as well. And I think it's a really important part of especially in a young person that's got a lot of ambition.
And I think, thank you, Will, for sharing that. And feelings are mutual. What the other thing that like Will was saying is that the mentor-mentee relationship, the joy that the mentor gets is actually having someone listen and absorb the knowledge and then actually go do it. And I think that's probably the most powerful way to honor someone that is investing time in you, is active listening and taking notes, like actually writing down things and then following up to say, hey, your advice helped me so much, I'm taking action on it. And we work a lot today of one of the qualities I call is, are you someone that is willing to be coached? And if you think back to sports, or whether you are involved in music or the arts, like, are you rehearsing and practicing to want to be better? And one skill that I do a lot of public speaking. And almost every time I finish and walk off that stage, I will ask someone around me, what feedback do you have? How did I do today? Because I want to get better. And I think no matter how successful you are in life, being willing to ask for feedback and being willing to be coached is so important.
I couldn't agree more. And I think and that often differentiates people who are able to hit the elite phase, if you will, in whatever they're trying to pursue, is that like one of their default mental models is like, I'm never going to get to the peak of my performance, right? Like there's always room to get to the next level, and being coachable and being willing to do exactly what Jason just said is spot on. So especially if you're young, because if you are young and just getting started, you're incredibly naive.
Yeah.
You have the market hasn't punched you in the face yet, right? Mike Tyson said everyone's got a plan until you get punched in the face. Like, you're going to learn a lot. And so your ability to really have mentors around you that can speak truth into you and help you on the journey is important.
Something else just around that is part of me meeting Will. And if in your town, in your industry, in your community, finding one or two other people that think like you, whether they're big dreamers or whether they maybe don't fit the mold, like they're just, I'll be honest, I'm a little weird. And I think,
no,
surprise. But like finding, like, I just didn't fit the mold. Like I had different ideas, ambitions, and some people call it, I'm just unemployable. Like I don't work well for someone else. I want to do things my own way. And so I found a few other people, and I would say Will was one of those individuals. And that was, again, probably what got the momentum in Bell Fountain, is I didn't feel that I was alone. And so Will and Beth, while Brittany was starting 600, and Brittany Saxton was a previous guest on the podcast, when she started her pizzeria, it was about the same time that Will and Beth started their coffee shop. So that was how people started thinking differently about downtown Bell Fountain. And again, when I felt lonely or when I needed an answer, I knew there were other people like that I could call.
That's awesome. That's a great tip. And just to kind of round out that conversation real quick, what are maybe one thing from each of you, something that you look for or that you would advise someone if they're going to find a mentor, like when you make that initial contact, maybe some do's and don'ts? Because I feel like a lot of people come out, hey, can I pick your brain? And like, that's a huge turnoff for a lot of people. So like, I don't know, if someone were to approach you, what would that kind of, look like?
I think it's reaching out and giving someone a compliment. If you notice that someone's doing something really great in your community, take the time to send them a handwritten note or an email, or reach out and just say, I admire you because you did this or accomplished this. And I would love the chance to shake your hand, or I'd love a chance to buy you coffee, just to chat. And I think that's where, when I get reach outs like that, if it's genuine, and that's so important to be authentic and genuine about those relationships. And then when I get thank yous and gratitude, it's like, I want to pay that back to someone else too.
What about you, Will?
Yeah, I agree. I would just say, it's when, I would say not necessarily on the initial outreach, but let's say you get the chance to sit down with somebody. I think authenticity is number one. So, you can be good at potentially getting the meeting, but within a meeting, within the first 10, 15, 20 minutes, like the person who is the potential mentor is going to have a read on you, right, as an individual.
Yeah.
And whether or not, like, what are your motives? Because, someone who is at a level of success, or even just busy, right, like time is your most precious asset. And so, being authentic, doing a research ahead of time, I think to your point, Jason, like understanding who the person is, what they've done, and really kind of just come into it with an open heart and say, how can I add value to you? And this is kind of what I would love to learn. And probably the most important thing, and actually Jason said it earlier, is that first meeting, you're probably going to get some advice. Your ability to like come back 2 weeks later, 30 days later, and say, hey, thanks so much for giving me these points or things this advice I needed to do. Here's how I've taken action on it and like what I've learned. Right?
Yeah. Wow. It's powerful.
Yeah.
And then it gives you a chance to open the door to ask a follow-up question.
Yep.
Yeah. That's awesome. Thank you. I think that's something that a lot of people, especially young professionals, can glean from that.
And show up with like wine or liquor, and you're good to go.
I mean, it's not a terrible thing either.
Or coffee.
There you go.
From Sweet Aromas.
From Sweet Aromas.
All right. Well, so what was after real estate for you? Because I know you had your hands in a lot of stuff there.
Yeah. So I was on a journey, I think, in really my early to mid 20s, in and around like finding who I was, right? And again, when Jason talks about like not fitting a mold, I think one element that both you and I kind of align on is like you take like taking life very seriously when you're in your late teens and early 20s, like thinking about 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 40 years from now. When I was in my early 20s, I kind of wrote out this plan looking at like, hey, when I'm 85, 90, about to leave this earth, and I look back, like, what do I want to be proud of, right?
Wow, yeah.
And so in that like kind of discovery of trying to find out who I was, I went from a lot of involvement in politics to the nonprofit world, served in ministry at a church here in town, worked as an insurance agent for a few years, and that was like my first exposure to the day-to-day operations of a small business, and ultimately just landed on that. For me, in my wiring, the marketplace, being an entrepreneur, being someone who goes out and starts businesses and grows businesses, is the ideal platform to not only, let's say, build success in life, but it becomes a platform through which you can do good and drive positive change for communities that you care about. And like, there's no better representation than Small Nation, quite frankly, right? It's a business, it's a platform, and it's literal work is to transform communities, which is pretty awesome. And so that journey started in real estate because it was my family's got a background in construction. It was like HGTV. You could like all the popular shows were flipping homes. I was all right, yeah, I can do this. But we did okay. Like, a lot of good decisions, a lot of bad decisions. I think I would say it's the business where I cut my teeth and really learned who I was as an entrepreneur, but had an evolution more towards tech companies and thinking about, problems that exist in our world and how they can be solved at scale through leveraging technology, and what value can you create, what problem can you solve, and do it at a high level. So really started diving in, and following great entrepreneurs and venture capitalists out of Silicon Valley on Twitter, which is just getting going at that time, and just consuming as much content around what it takes to start a tech company and scale a tech company and raise venture capital. And so that kind of started my journey into tech, which has been interesting in and of itself. And
I think at the time that you have done that, there really wasn't a tech scene in Ohio, let alone, small cities like Columbus, in the whole country. Sure. Yeah. Columbus is small. It's 14th largest in the country, but related to tech, there was no ecosystem when you first started looking at this, right?
Yeah, it's so when I decided to launch the first tech company, which is called Huddlewoo, and there's no tech company in Bellefontaine, or no tech ecosystem in Bellefontaine, Ohio, unfortunately. Come on, Jason.
No, we didn't have that. It did not exist.
It's like, all right, I need to go somewhere where there's a community, and it's like we're close to Columbus. We're in the Columbus region. There's a lot of connectivity there. So I started spending time literally just driving to Columbus and meeting as many people as I could. And, probably a little bit naive, but I did think at the time, like, all right, I'm driving into Columbus. It's the 14th largest city in the U.S. There has to be like abundant venture capital dollars flowing through the streets in Columbus, Ohio. And the harsh reality is what you just said, Jason. There's very little. Like, there was a little bit of activity in terms of, you had a couple organizations that were being incubators, had a few angel investors, but from a culture, and from, if you looked at like a pie chart of invested dollars from a region into various assets and opportunities, a tiny sliver was venture capital.
Talk to me. Why were you looking for venture capital? Like, first of all, let's just break it down a little bit. What is venture capital investing, and why were you looking for it for what you wanted to do?
Yep. So the way I like to look at financing, right? So raising capital for your business, it's a spectrum that kind of follows a spectrum of business types. Okay. So venture capital is a investment where the investors are focused on making generally equity investments. So they're investing dollars to buy a percentage of equity in a company that is at its beginning years, at the beginning of its journey, right? Could just be getting a product to market, or just at the beginning stages of growth. Yep. And what venture capitalists are looking for is they're looking for companies that maybe 5 people generating $100,000 in revenue today, but the problem that they're solving, and if we could give them more capital, in 5 to 7 to 10 years, that could become a company that's thousands of people generating hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue. So it's a investment model that is solely kind of focused on that small percentage of companies that are started, of small businesses that are started, that have potential to scale to really, really big outcomes. And so generally, a lot of venture capital flows in technology or biotech, where those early investments, getting equity ownership when a company is just getting going, let's say it's worth a couple $1 million, can return hundreds of times of your investment over a course of 7 to 10 years. But also a large percentage of those just simply don't make it.
So it's kind of standard for the kind of business that you wanted to start.
Yeah. So starting a tech company. So kind of break it down a little bit more. Generally one of the attributes of tech companies is you're not making money day one. It doesn't cash flow. So you have an investment into building a product or building a software platform. So dollars have to flow in to the development of the product that you're going to deliver to the market. And even once you get the product to the market, you may not have a revenue generating product from day one. So you've got to supplement that time. You've got to build what you would call runway, cash runway, the ability to pay for the operations of the business. And in venture capital, you do that through raising capital from investors. And so both of the first 2 tech companies I started, all 3, were modeled around they needed venture capital dollars in order to grow. And interesting, from a hindsight perspective, though I wouldn't really change anything, but when I think about it, I probably I made a big assumption that there was a lot of venture capital in Columbus, and that was a very harsh reality. That
at the time, now it's interesting. Things have changed there.
Thank God.
And what's been your hand in that?
So, hopefully a little hand, I guess, but I think a big part of it is so there's a macro trend where. If you look 10 years ago, the vast majority of venture capital was concentrated in Silicon Valley, New York, and the Boston area. And Silicon Valley is basically San Francisco, just south of San Francisco, the Bay Area, the South Bay. And today that's still the majority is there, but what you're starting to see is this macro trend where more and more venture capital is flowing into secondary and tertiary cities like Columbus, Ohio. And so much so, and I would say I've played a little part. I would say the firm that's played the biggest part is a firm called Drive Capital, which was started 2 partners that left Sequoia Capital, which is a big venture firm in Silicon Valley, and they came to Columbus and said, investing in the Midwest is the opportunity of our lifetime. There are great entrepreneurs, there's a lot of technical talent, great engineers. What is missing from the ecosystem is risk capital, venture capital. And they came in, and I think they got going in 2014. And up to now, they've raised over $2 billion in assets that they're managing, and have invested in great companies that are scaling.
And I think the lesson I've learned is watching people like Warren Buffett, who is the contrarian oftentimes. Yep. And when everyone is doing one thing, it's kind of good to see what everyone is not doing and focusing on that. And I think that is the thing that surprises most investors when they learn about the small nation model. They're thinking, well, you must be in some very bustling large market. And I say, no, we were in a town that was struggling and underrated. Yep. There just wasn't the capital to activate the entrepreneurship that was there. And I think that is something, as a lesson, you may drive by an abandoned property. You may be in a town that has a great internet connection, which could be a huge advantageous thing if you want to have your tech company. And I think that's how the playing field is being leveled today. You know, getting access to the utilities, the high-speed internet, the infrastructure is a lot easier and a lot more affordable in a place like the Midwest or Ohio or Bellefontaine.
Yeah, absolutely. And COVID had a lot to do actually with as an accelerant to that macro shift. And it's interesting. So Nikola Labs was a third tech company that I launched in, CEO of it for a few years, and it's kind of high growth now and doing really well. But with
we
COVID,
warned you.
Yeah, you warned me. But with COVID, once it hit, we went remote, because out of necessity. But then we settled in very quickly that we're going to remain remote because everyone enjoys it and they're highly productive. And we went from 20 people in Central Ohio. Now we have about 70 employees across, I think, like 15 or 16 states. And so much of what you mentioned, Jason, which is interesting. One of our employees literally just moved from Cleveland to a very remote town in West Virginia, like southern West Virginia, because that town basically said, we've got great internet connectivity, we've got great quality of life, you've got nature around you, and they give economic incentives for people to come there and work remotely. So you have a tech worker coming and basically able to work remotely and is more or less compensated, if you will, by I think it's the state that's actually doing it. I thought it was quite interesting.
Very cool.
And it's feeding that ecosystem too, which is really cool.
Yep.
So you said you started a couple tech companies. What were those companies? And
tell us about Nikola Labs. That is the one that I just think is super fascinating.
So Nikola, it's been quite the journey. So it started in October 2014 as a spin out from Ohio State. So first two tech companies I ended up having to shut down because if you're relying on venture capital and there isn't any, then you generally run into problems.
And just to make a quick comment, like Huddlewoo, which Will spoke about earlier, for those listeners that are familiar with Cameo and how it's blown up, Huddlewoo was almost identical to that. But Will innovated and thought up that business model 10 years before it happened. And so if you wanted access to connect to a celebrity, a thought leader, you could pay a fee or make a donation through that platform to get access to connect with them. So, that was kind of Huddlewoo, but you were ahead of your time.
Yeah.
And it probably ran out of funding, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That was the biggest issue is like it was set up, it had to have venture capital in order to work. And we went to the market to try to raise, $500,000 and just couldn't get it done. And it was a lot, there's always things that you can improve as you learned a lot of things I could have done better, but a big part of it was the ecosystem just really wasn't there. So, but I'm a big fan of failing forward in life. Nice. And basically on the other side of shutting those down was looking for the next opportunity and had the great fortune to meet Dr. Chi-Chi Chen, who was a research professor at Ohio State that was working on really interesting technology related to wireless power transfer. So today we get electricity from point A to point B via wires, right? Mm-hmm. Cables and plugs and wires throughout walls and electrical lines. But just how internet connectivity went in the past from being, accessible through a wire to Wi-Fi, where now internet connectivity is distributed in a space, power has the same potential. That there's a future where power will be transmitted wirelessly. And so whether it's a mobile device or just a large number of devices that rely on power in order to function over time, there will be a future where that power will be delivered without wires.
It's a sci-fi podcast now.
Yeah.
Well, and the thing about it is, Will and I were kind of talking about that, and I think what is amazing about what you have to do as an entrepreneur, you've got to be willing to listen to your customers and you've got to be willing to pivot. And I think initially you were thinking a consumer-based business, but share the genius of where you're at today.
Yeah. So what's interesting is that the business today is 180 degrees different from where we started and isn't even really relying on wireless power today, because we found that some of the other technology that we developed around low power sensors is a better solution. So we went to the market trying to figure out great applications for wireless power. You would call it a frontier technology, so no market yet, trying to get it be one of the first. And you have to, Jason's point, like you have to follow the market. You have to like really dive in and just build a lot of relationships when you're in business development mode. And one of those relationships led us to an application in and around sensor-based condition monitoring for manufacturing facilities, which is really about proactive maintenance. It's about being able to understand that on a motor that is driving a piece of equipment in a manufacturing facility, that motor, if it fails during production, it is a very expensive problem for manufacturers. So if you can take sensor technology, specifically vibration technology, and see that motor is starting to have an issue weeks ahead of it actually failing, then you can empower a maintenance team to go in and fix it before it ever leads to failure. So you can eliminate unplanned downtime. This was kind of defined as one of the killer apps for what is called the industrial Internet of Things. And we got into the space right at the right time, ended up falling in love with it. This is like 2017, 2018. Pivoted the entire company to literally just focus on this and then go from a component supplier to literally an all-in-one solution. Got to market in early 2019. Came into 2020 as a growth year. COVID paused things by a few months, but it still ended up being a great year. 21 was nuts, and so far 2022 has been just fantastic.
And you got some great news in terms of additional fundraising round recently?
Yep. So to date, Nikola Labs, we've raised over $50 million. 29 of that has come in the last couple months. Venture, going back to one of your questions about venture capital, there are different types of venture capitalists that invest at different stages. Mm-hmm. We were growing from the early stage where you're just trying to get something to market to growth stage, which is where you've got something in market, customers love it, and investors can do math that if I come in and I give you $20 million or $40 million, where I can give you cash, which gives you the ability to invest in growth significantly faster than what you can on your own free cash flow, then you can really scale up faster and get more market share quickly. That's really the game at that stage. And we're very fortunate to bring in a lead investor called G2 Venture Partners out of Silicon Valley. 4 founders of the firm were at Kleiner Perkins previously, which is a tier 1 firm. And they are fantastic. They led the round. The total round was $29.1 million. And now we've got the runway. We've got great momentum in the market, great customer base that we serve every day. And now it's, applying that capital to grow the company as quick as we can over the next 2 years.
Wow. What a journey.
Can you speak for someone, if you think back to those beginning periods of your life where you're raising money, a lot of times I run into entrepreneurs and they're like, how do I get a loan? Like, just think back to those basic early periods, whether it's, getting a little of that startup capital to start your home-based business or buy your first piece of real estate. What would be your advice for people that need to get access to money?
Yep. So I think a lot of it starts with the story and it starts with the vision, and making it very simple and very plain, right? And being able to communicate it with passion, and communicate it succinctly. I'm a big fan of Gary Vaynerchuk, Gary V. He talks about something called clouds and dirt. It's a model that I think is great. And if you think about clouds as the vision, as the big story, talking about the future and what you want to create, but you can't just take clouds into an investor conversation. You've got to have clouds and dirt. So the cloud is the story. The dirt is, here are the practical steps that I'm going to take. Here's what we've already done.
Yep.
Here's the practical steps that we're going to take. And here is how I'm going to apply your capital that I'm asking you to give me in the most efficient way to produce a return on the investment, based on the business forecast.
Where do you go to even have the opportunity to do that?
So that gets into the spectrum of businesses and investment solutions, right?
Can you answer the question, if you heard the word private money lender, what is a private money lender?
So a private money lender, it's fascinating. So a private money lender, if you think about like you're going to invest in a piece of real estate or you're going to start a small business, and let's say you don't have, you're just getting started. Let's say you don't have any track record, or you don't have any established wealth already, right? Mm-hmm. To where you can fund the startup costs. you're likely not able to go into a bank and get financing for the startup costs.
Yep.
There are a set of lenders that are private individuals, typically, could potentially be private firms that are generally there. So I mentioned that venture capitalists often invest for equity. Private money lenders invest debt. And there could be some mixture of equity or warrants, which is an ultimate form of equity. But basically, it is a population of investors that, in my perspective, like really are meaningful for entrepreneurs that are just getting going.
I'm glad you said that, because I think sometimes private money lenders get a bad rap because they are not a traditional bank. And I think the reason why is that they often times charge more interest than what a traditional bank would be. But when I first started out, I depended on friends and family to be private money lenders because I didn't have the track record to go to the traditional commercial bank.
Yep, and I think it's actually a great statement. You cannot, the two are not the same in terms of private money lenders versus a traditional bank. The reason why a private money lender is going to charge higher interest is that the risk of full capital loss is significantly greater.
Yeah, there's a reason the bank didn't back you.
Yeah, and oftentimes you have no collateral. So that the term collateral is you're pledging something that in the event that you cannot repay the loan, that you have to give something up. And a lot of times, I know when I started out, I didn't even own my car, did not own a house, did not have any assets. Maybe my bicycle, but who would want that, right?
Awesome bike.
Thank you. I had the streamers and everything,
So, but it's a great point. So, but it's the lifeline. It's the opportunity to get the capital that you need to start your business. So I'm a big fan of, and it's also the thing that's interesting about it. I would say is that it's also like a human to human relationship generally, right? It's not necessarily a human to institution, and obviously you want to have great relationships with bankers, but it's an individual that is generally investing their own wealth, as opposed to the deposits of people in a banking institution or investors into a fund that is being managed. At Nikola, we actually had first couple rounds were more angel investors, and these are individuals that they're investing $25,000, $50,000, $100,000 of their own money, right? And that becomes for me, it's a sacred thing, right? Mm-hmm. If someone is investing their own capital that they've worked towards, and they have a lot of other opportunities for that, to be in the position where you're a steward now of that capital is pretty powerful. And, it's going to be expensive, whether it's equity or debt, but it's the covenant more than anything else I think makes it interesting.
What are other, when you first start out, opportunities to get leverage or to get debt? Truthfully, I hear a lot of entrepreneurs, they share the stories that they use credit cards.
Yeah.
Highest interest, but that sometimes there are some expenses and things you had to put on the credit card, and you would use one credit card to pay off the other credit card.
Oh, geez.
No, I know you're hearing that, but that, no matter what scale or size that you're in your business, cash flow and cash is something I still have my eyes on daily in our business. Can you speak to that?
Yeah. It's one of the things, and you're inevitably going to be in the situation if you start a business that you're going to get to a cash crunch, right?
Yeah.
I don't care what size either.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Nikola Labs, we're intentionally unprofitable and not cash flowing because we're trying to invest in growth. There's a very big downside to that, right?
Sleepless nights,
yeah,
right?
There have been probably half a dozen times where we've been at the edge of the cliff, oh my goodness,
wow,
we don't make payroll the next payroll cycle, right?
And I think that's something that when you talk to other founders, we have all had that at some point, and no matter what size the business is. And so, I think, what are some of the insurance policies and ways that you can overcome that?
Yep. So what I like to build is optionality. For me in business, optionality is super critical, right? And it's kind of doing the work in advance, and it depends a little bit on the business, whether it's a cash flow business or if it's something that's not necessarily cash flow. But let's take a cash flow business, right? I would try to have as many lines of credit, if you will, and not even access them, but have like as many lines of credit as you possibly can. So if something goes against you, and you now are within 30 days, 15 days of hitting a cash crunch, you at least have those levers that you can pull, and you want to establish that when the sun is shining, right? Make hay when the sun is shining, because the last thing you want to do is your back's against the wall in that situation, and that's when you're going out trying to solve the problem. There's a gamut, like personal loans and loans against real estate, and like there are like I think you just have to be creative in order to have the solutions there if you need it, and look at it from an insurance perspective, right? Because you're inevitably going to get to everyone's going to find a crunch at some point, unfortunately.
Yeah. So talk to us then about Zell Capital. Like you were at Nikola Labs, and then talk about that transition to.
So I served as CEO from Nikola Labs from founding up until the second half of 2020. Mm-hmm. And in 2018, I brought in a person who was really the scale-up leader for Nikola. Like I knew I thrive in the earliest days, but once the business is starting to scale, I think there's it's a different type of skill set that's needed. So as an entrepreneur, you either have to decide I'm going to like evolve to be that person, or I'm going to find a replacement.
Yeah.
And I wanted to be very proactive.
And that's valuable for you, that you know what your unique ability is. I think for some folks, they try to be everything to everyone.
Yeah.
And as I've had more professional maturity, I know where my shortcomings are, and I know what my gifts are. So that the areas that I'm not as strong, I really respect that you know yourself, and you know what your gifts are.
Yeah, the challenge for a lot of founders, especially that don't necessarily have that self-awareness, is like that's when you get kicked out by your board, right? Because unless you're able to put in the time, energy, and effort to change as a leader, leading an organization of 20 is very different than an organization of 100 or 200 or 500, right? And so I always kind of one of my just fundamental principles that I follow is I always want to be proactive in that manner, right? And so 2.5 years ago, or 2.5 years before even making the transition, I had brought in the person, and we more or less, his name's Brian Graham, he's phenomenal. He came in as chief operating officer, but we basically co-led the organization and had an alignment that there's going to come a point in time where I'm going to say it's yours, and I'm going to transition to a different role. And that role is executive chair, which is a great role. It allows you to still be active in the business, so it's not a passive, just show up to a board meeting once a quarter. I'm in the business every day, still connected to the culture and influencing it in the team. But it's obvious that it's not my full-time role, right? Yeah. So I did that to, a big part of that was to launch Zell Capital, and now go from being a founder that's out raising capital to now be an investor that is that is investing in other entrepreneurs that are just getting going. And it's been great. We've got 5 companies that we've invested. There are 2 of them that were very hands-on, and it's kind of cool. It's one of those moments where like you see yourself, because these are first-time entrepreneurs just getting started, going through a lot of that journey, and you don't have to be an operator or entrepreneur turned VC to be a great VC. There's plenty of data out there that shows just people who are trained in finance can be great VCs. But I personally believe and love the fact that I have a significant amount of empathy that I can bring to the table with the founders that we invest in, just around like I've been there, done it, I've lived it. I've lived the worst of it, right? And stepped up again, and like so. Being able, especially when like there's always so much chaos and like pain in those early days, having people who can give you that encouragement, speak life, and give you that perspective is really important.
That's awesome. So you are actively dealing with, people coming to you for investment, kind of like we did with my earlier question. What are some of those things that, again, is attractive to you as an investor? Someone's approach, like, ideas, like as an investor, what are some of those good things that, like, if this person were to be in front of you, you have a much higher, and honestly, both of you can answer this, much higher likelihood of, investing or hearing them out, It's
a good question. So I'll hit the kind of the soft skills or hard skills of the individual here in a second.
Yeah.
But I do invest. I'm a generalist investor, so I'll invest across a number of industries, but it is through a very specific thesis. which is around understanding how value exists and value transactions exist in a market, which is called the status quo. So what's happening, what are the main relationships, what are the main agreements that buyers and sellers have in a particular market, that a startup, this entrepreneur, is now coming in with a set of speculative claims of how they're going to disrupt the market, if you will, right? And so if you understand kind of how value is created and exists from a first principle perspective, then you can begin to assess the speculative claims that if this entrepreneur, if this team's able to deliver, what they're really bringing to the table is a new set of value transactions, a new agreement, if you will, or a set of agreements that they want to have with the buyers in the market. And so is that set of agreements, are those value transactions, do they create a significantly greater experience in the status quo at hopefully a lower cost, or at least at the same cost? And if you can't, if I can't get conviction around that there's some, whether it's technology leverage or some other lever that allows a new entrant to come in and say, we're going to just blow the minds of the current buyers in this market and displace the status quo, then we just can't get there.
And I'll add to that, a lot of the companies that I work with and business owners that I meet, we deploy a lot of what Will's saying, but in a more simplistic term. So if you think of the lean startup method, I like people to kind of have that one-page plan. Like, what is the problem they're looking to solve? What is the solution, the idea, the product, the business that they want to address with that? What is unique about it? And have they ever tested a prototype? And when I say a prototype, it would be if you want to open up a shop that makes hand lotions and soap, have you been able to do that at a smaller scale with friends and family, maybe at a pop-up event or market, that that people will actually buy what you offer? And I think for most entrepreneurs, where that evolution of pivoting and learning happens is what they initially thought was what their customers wanted is not where they end up. And I think you heard today with Will, and part of what I admire about his journey and his success is he has listened and pivoted. And even with his first few endeavors, and I don't even like using the word fail, but I would say it just wasn't meant to be. Mm-hmm. It gave him the foundation, the knowledge to accomplish the fund. You're hearing a funding round of millions of dollars. Okay. And so I think that's just got to be part of the journey, is that you've got to start somewhere. Find a way to get your one-page business plan down, find a way to get your prototype out, and then listen and ask questions. I mean, I think that is really how you build a business in a box, and then always continuing to welcome feedback for how to make it better.
The other thing that I look for is grit and tenacity. Right. Yeah. Because, been there, done that, that person is about to jump into water where there's sharks. Right.
Yeah.
And so understanding that the journey that brought that person to let's say the table where they are in front of me, and like, what challenges have they overcome in their life? Like has their back been against the wall, how they respond to it? Mm-hmm. And, just getting a sense for, does this person have the wiring, to be able to continually push and persevere through obstacle that is going to certainly be in their way.
Yeah, I love that. And I think for our listeners, I think this is a great example, right? We have, in contrast of each other, we have venture capital investing, and we talked a lot about that and how it's different from a private money loan. And we kind of have two investors operating in different ways, serving, two different kinds of businesses, right? Like, so I wouldn't expect to go to venture capital investor if I want to open, like a soap bar, something like that.
And just to tie here, how the soap bar leads to a real estate acquisition, leads to building a company like Small Nation. This is where like Will and I are having more conceptual, larger conversations. Now, about every venture capital firm around the country wants to invest in real estate, and they want to invest in small towns or like what was saying earlier, the Midwest. Mm-hmm. They actually call the Midwest the Silicon Heartland.
Yeah.
So it's interesting how your one little small business actually can turn into something bigger too.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. If someone were listening to this podcast and were looking for investment opportunities, where would you point them?
Looking for investment opportunities, meaning they have capital and they want to invest in those opportunities?
Yeah.
Well, so that's a good question. I would say it does depend on the type of investments that you're looking for, right? So if you want to be an angel investor or invest in tech startups, there are great platforms that are out there like AngelList. You generally would be able to go to your local community if it's a larger city and see, there may be angel networks that are out there. Certainly startups, I would go spend some time if there are any established funds or venture capital funds, spend some time with them and try to understand deal flow. And then in venture, spend a good amount of time on Twitter, actually. There's a lot of deal flow.
And I think on the smaller side of things, like get involved in your local chamber of commerce and economic development. If your community has a co-working facility, hang around, get a membership. Like, I think the thing that I'm so inspired by is when I'm over at Build, which is the co-work facility in our town, the kind of people that are in there on a day-to-day basis, just striking up a conversation saying, what do you do? That could lead to a business deal for you.
Yeah.
And so, I think the ecosystem might be in your backyard.
Yep.
You just need to network and get to know who is looking for capital, or if you're that person looking for capital, get involved in a community where you can share your story and the needs that you have.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Last question, Will. If someone were to follow you or the work that you're doing with Zell Capital or anything that you're doing, where can they find you?
Sweet Aromas Coffee.
Beth is going to love that pitch, by the way. And first off,
come to the fountain.
what is at Sweet Aromas Coffee? What is your go-to drink?
Papua New Guinea. It's just black coffee.
The blend?
The blend of it just, it's been my favorite for 10 years. We work with Hemisphere Coffee Roasters out of Mechanicsburg. It's just great. So I just literally drink coffee with a little bit of half and half. I'm an easy peasy. But you do have to come to Bell Fountain to see me.
All right. I love that answer.
It's like I think Warren Buffett is the Oracle of Omaha.
Yeah.
And we've got Will Zell, the Oracle.
That's you, man.
I don't know about that.
the
Hosting
Oracle.
a podcast.
I'm the Oracle of Huntsville.
Okay. I'll give you that. Huntsville is both of our hometowns. No, it's my hometown.
Your
hometown.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they're good. I'm on Twitter and LinkedIn. Yeah. Will L. Zell on Twitter and LinkedIn. I actually, what's interesting is I have been spending way less time on social media, just because
I think a lot of people have.
Yeah. Yep.
There's been, it seems like as the platforms get more monetized, sometimes the distractions and the busyness doesn't make sense either too.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, here's the thing I took away today, Ethan, is that, grit, you kind of share two things, grit and tenacity. And I think that being an investor, really having the courage to reach out to mentors, that was kind of a big thing. And then being able to follow through with asking for feedback, getting advice, sending the thank yous and gratitude, and then being able to pivot and see through the good times and the times that are a little bit dark. Because this is not easy, right? But is it worth it? That's my question to you. Is it worth it?
Oh, absolutely.
Totally.
Yeah, without a doubt.
I love that. Thank you so much for being here, Will. Appreciate it, man.
My pleasure. Thanks
for sharing.
Thanks, Will. Yep.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for tuning in and checking out the Small Nation podcast. You can find us anywhere that you listen to your podcast, including Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and even the Small Nation YouTube channel. I hope you're able to pull some value out from that conversation. We hope to see you in the next one. If you enjoyed it, be sure to leave a like, comment, or a 5-star review to help more people discover this podcast. Stay tuned to Small Nation on social media to keep up with all the cool projects that are happening here. And until next time, this is Ethan with the Small Nation podcast signing off. Thanks, guys. I was a little late on the music there.